Welcome to the Atlantic. My name is Bob Cohen. I'm the president of the Atlantic, and really happy you could join us for this special conversation today. It's one of the great cliches in Washington to refer to someone as my very good friend. For starters, it's almost never true. And it's got to be doubly bad to introduce two people as my very good friends. And yet I'm about to do just that. And it's a whole nother cliche to say these are two men that need no introductions. And that, of course, is true, but I'm going to introduce them anyway because I'm standing here. So Ta-Nehisi Coates is a national correspondent for the Atlantic, where he writes about race and politics and social policy. He came to the Atlantic 10 years ago as a blogger, remember them? And in the last few years, he's written on such topics as Barack Obama, the case for reparations, the black family in the age of mass incarceration. And along the way, he's written in the last few years 2 new books, Between the World and Me, which was a New York Times bestseller for about a gazillion weeks, and his recent collection of Atlantic essays, We Were 8 Years in Power. And Ta-Nehisi will be here with Jeff Goldberg, who's editor-in-chief of the Atlantic. It's a post he's held for about the last 16 months, and before that, he was for 10 years a writer for the Atlantic with a special expertise in the Middle East. And during that time, he wrote 11 cover stories for us and thousands of other print and digital pieces. Jeff doesn't have the opportunity to write as much as he used to, I think, which is a source of some frustration to him, but he does heroic work running our growing newsroom across our many platforms. So please welcome my very good friends, Jeff and Ta-Nehisi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Ta-Nehisi.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Thanks for getting dressed up. Really appreciate it.
This is how you treat your writers?
Appreciate it.
Take cracks at
I'm gonna buy a tie for his. I'm gonna buy him a tie for his birthday. So we're gonna talk for a few minutes up here, and then we're gonna take some questions from the audience, and we'll try to be efficient about everything. I want to thank all of you for coming. I really appreciate your support. T, let's just jump into a couple of things. I want to talk about this book, which is the Atlantic in hardcover in many ways. But I want to ask you a couple of things about things that are happening in your life and things that are happening in the country. The first is, so when you get to be the nation's most important nonfiction writer, people sometimes take shots at you. You're in a kind of a one-sided war with Cornel West right now, in the sense that he fires things at you and you don't care. But I wanted to talk about, can you talk about that for a second and talk about the split that he's identified in, let's say, the progressive community, African-American progressive community. He basically argues that you're too pessimistic about the world, that you're not politically engaged enough, that your job is to be politically engaged in the struggles that he has determined you should be engaged in. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, I should say, as much as I'd like to agree and say I don't care, I actually do care. I first saw Cornel West 96, I think, 1996, when I was a student at Howard University, and maybe it was a little later, it was like 97 or so. He had this book with Henry Louis Gates that he was promoting, and both of them came over to Howard University, and as good as Gates was, West was absolutely brilliant. I had never seen anyone who had the ability to connect Malcolm X and Public Enemy and Kierkegaard, and I mean I didn't understand half of what he was saying. But that was, and I don't say that to mock him. I mean, when I first read James Baldwin, I didn't understand what Baldwin was saying either. It was a thrilling experience, and just a sense of how high things really can go and on what level you can actually perform as a writer, as a thinker, as an intellectual. It's surreal to be here now. It's surreal for that person, who you saw 20 years ago and then saw again after that a few times, I'm trying to be as fair as I can. To write critical things about you when they have so clearly not read your work. I don't know how many of you know this, but this started 2 years ago when Between the World and Me came out, and Cornel West wrote a Facebook post, and the post was all about, for the most part, Toni Morrison's endorsement of the book and why it was wrong and ... And again, it was clear he hadn't read the book, and then it continued. And every time it just, is clear like that he's not, I don't know, he's either read the work, very loosely or just glanced at it. I have no idea why this is happening. I don't really have, particular insights here. I have things that I think probably when I'm in my worst place, but I don't have, good answers to what's going on because I can't identify much of a split between things I've written about and what he claims to believe in. I guess you could say I haven't, written about the irresponsibility of Wall Street. I haven't, written in depth about. I haven't done a deep piece in the way that I did the case for reparations about, Obama's Middle East policy or, any number of issues that might be, important to the progressive community. But I don't think journalists should be in the habit of doing that.
People want you to take on responsibilities that you don't want to take on.
No, I think people want me to speak about things that I'm ignorant about. And they want me to speak in a way that makes them feel good. And I think that's a bad idea. I think it's a terrible, I think there are enough people who are out talking about things that they don't know much about, because it's not just that when you stand up and take a stand, on something that, you have to take that stand, you better be ready to fight about it. I didn't just, write an 800-word column about, reparations. I spent, as you know, 2 years, almost reporting and reading about it. We have a piece that, we're working on, right now, Jeff and I, we talk about all the time. And I, first pitched this to Jeff last spring, and I'm reading it and focusing on it and trying to make it as tight as possible, because when the piece comes out, I am going to have to fight about it. I can't fight effectively on 5 different fronts. No one should try to. Because I don't, unless, you're the world's most gifted genius, I don't think you can do that with the level of skill and the level of rigor that you really need to do. At least I can't, without having my feet firmly planted, and doing what I need to do. So I'm as mystified as, anybody else. After the first, sort of thing that happened, me and Cornel have the same literary agent. So you got it's bizarre.
It's a little awkward.
I am confused. I'm deeply confused. But after the first time, he called up, he got my number from my agent. He called me up, and I literally didn't understand what he was saying. I could not tease out any sort of critique or actual disagreement, that might be there. So I don't, I wish Cornel the best. It is the 25th anniversary of Race Matters, which is a tremendously important book. I hope those of you who have not not read it, I hope you go out and get it and read it. And I wish him the best. I wish him a long life, in the public sphere, putting out ideas that people need to hear.
Let's talk about race and the presidency right now. Your last big piece for The Atlantic forms the epilogue of this book, First White President. Great title, by the way, great headline.
Jeff didn't want me to use
we had
that
a big
so
fight.
he takes credit for it.
I said,
Jeff
no.
was like, no one will get this, because he wasn't the first white president. No one will get it.
Well, I wasn't that literalist about it, but I saw some problems, and I went, having been a writer for 26 years and an editor for 1, I went with the writer, and the writer was right. And it's a lesson. But I want to talk about the last couple of weeks. Are you surprised that there's a debate in this country about whether Donald Trump is a racist?
No. No, I mean,
Are you surprised? Let me rephrase it. Are you surprised that a larger number of people now are calling him a racist than when you wrote that piece? I mean, you've been working on that, obviously, right from inauguration time.
Right. I'm not surprised. I'm heartened. It's good. It's a first level. I'm heartened. I'm happy to see it. But again, I mean, it just seemed clear. Like it seemed pretty obvious. Racism serves as, a function in Donald Trump's public life from the moment he makes his first, public appearance as a, being sued for, housing segregation, and then it just continues. It just repeatedly, as I document in the piece, it continues right up until, it's time for him to, begin to build, political basis for his presidential campaign, which was rooted in the, deeply racist notion that Barack Obama was not a legitimate citizen of this country. If you have, some 30, 40 years of this in your life, why would you change because you became president? I think the expectation that he would change was more surprising to me than anything. People are who they are, and Donald Trump is who he was elected to be. One thing you can't say is, I was hoodwinked. You can't be like, he is who he campaigned as,
Talk a little bit about the forces of reaction that you think. You believe that we're in a period of white backlash. Is this the receding roar of an older America, or is this the resurgence of something? You and I, we've gone back and forth on this. Yeah. Nicole, a lot of us have gone back and forth on this. If history is a circle or history is an arrow, right. You tend to land on the history is a circle argument. Do you see any hope that it's not?
Well, circle will probably be more optimistic than I would be. I think, again, chaos.
Wait, circle is more optimistic? That it's coming back on itself?
Yeah, because then that implies some sort of predictability, which I don't really believe in. I think it's chaos. I think you don't really know. That was always my problem, with the, arc of history, bends towards justice thing. It presumes a kind of knowing, which I don't think is evident. Wait, what was the question again?
I don't even remember. Doesn't
matter.
No,
I can do this.
But optimism, pessimism, which way does the arc bend? Do you feel like
the period of backlash?
Do you feel like? No. The question is, it's like what Matthew Arnold wrote about the receding roar of the sea.
Oh, right. Yes.
It's. Thank you very much.
Okay.
We barely pay attention to each other in the best of times. So the question is, is this the last gasp of a white nationalist movement, or do you somehow see it?
Right.
It's very hard to picture us going back to the 20s and 30s and the discourse of those times, except maybe it's not. I don't know.
Right. So I would like to think that it is the receding roar. The problem is Dylan Roof was younger than me. The problem is I didn't see a bunch of 70-year-olds marching on Charlottesville. The problem is, Donald Trump did win a majority of white millennials in this country. He won, majority of virtually every, white demographic worth mentioning. Now, you can say that those people weren't necessarily voting because, of his campaign. They weren't voting because he was, a birther. They weren't voting for him because he said, Mexico is sending racists, because he wanted to ban Muslims. But it didn't stop him either. And so if you're on the other side of that, it's not particularly comforting that, the best you can say of folks is that they're kind of, apathetic, about, racism.
Do you hold out the possibility that some people who voted for Donald Trump aren't racist?
Yes.
Talk about that.
I mean, that's not, too hard to imagine for me. People make all sorts of calculus. I mean, I rarely have, voted. I was 100% with them. You have things about people that you like, and you have things that you don't like. And so, certainly there are people who, white people in this country, who probably have, as Trump might say, no racist bones in their body. But again, but racism did not stop them. And that is not comforting for me. If anything, that corresponds roughly, I would argue, with the history of racism in this country. I don't think it's true, for instance, under the era of segregation or Jim Crow, that everybody in Mississippi or in Alabama thought it was okay to lynch black people. But not enough of them thought that they should stand up and stop it. Everybody living, in Alabama didn't necessarily have to be with Bull Connor. But a large number of people thought it was okay, or just not important enough in their lives that they should stand up and do something about it. So I don't think it requires that, you voted for Trump, and therefore unnecessarily racist for me to be, afraid, for me to be disturbed, for me to be scared. The very fact that you don't yourself view it as any sort of existential threat, the very fact that you don't see it, as immediately dismissible or disqualifying, that's scary enough.
Donald Trump identified himself the other day as the least racist person any of us have ever interviewed. Who is the least racist person you've ever interviewed?
I don't know, Jeff. I mean, that's like a quick trick question.
It's not a trick question.
I mean, I guess Obama, right?
Talk about that.
Um,
He's past any kind of tribal
no one's
feeling?
past. No one's past that. No one's past that. He's very good at seeing the best in people. Sometimes to his detriment, I would argue. If anything, I thought he often saw the worst in black people. So, I mean, I think he was very good at seeing the best in people who were, and this goes back to your question about racism, the best in people who were outside of the community that he identified with. That's what I would say. And I mean that, he identified as, a black biracial man. And so, he, and I make this argument, in the last piece, he had a faith in the goodwill of white America that I think very few black people in this country possess. I think, again, as I say, I think that was essential and necessary in him becoming president. I also think it was essential and necessary in him not seeing the possibility of Donald Trump.
Talk for a minute about the making of this book. Describe the sequence for people who haven't read it.
Yeah.
Describe the sequence and answer this question. Did you know at the beginning of the Obama administration, when you started writing about this phenomenon, did you know that it would end up in a place like this where it's coherent?
Absolutely.
Well, talk about the structure of this.
Well, I mean, the
and
book
how you
starts,
came to
it
this.
literally is a chronology, and it starts with me in an unemployment office, and that's where I was, when I, began the first, big piece that's in this book. It's really, the world is messed up, because after you get one award or one accolade, people start piling them on you. And I'm happy for all the accolades I've gotten, and I'm happy, for the MacArthur money and all the other things. But when I was starting this book, I really needed those accolades. And I really needed all of that money. I mean, the things people offer you are just insane. I mean, it really, really is, and sometimes get offended that you won't take them. After Between the World and Me was published, and it did really, really well, right? And what happens when a book sells and it does really, really well, is your next contract reflects that fact. So I signed a really nice 2-book contract, and one of the books wasn't even much work. It was supposed to be a compilation of, pieces that I had written for the Atlantic. But I like writing, and I actually really like making books, and so I was not excited about slapping together, some stuff from the Atlantic, writing an introduction, here's some stuff I slapped together from the Atlantic, and then a conclusion. I hope you enjoyed that. I mean,
The world is bending toward chaos. I hope you enjoyed it.
I mean, they pay you well. You know what I mean? When people say nice things about you, like Jeff sometimes says about me, you are really, really well paid for that. And so, I mean, even if you're not well paid for that, you should have a certain work ethic. But certainly when you're well paid for it, you should. And so I went back, and I was always obsessed with this idea, how can I make this into an actual book? And not just a best of. And as I read through the pieces and as I read through the blog, it was clear to me that there were things that I was thinking at the time that I had forgotten. And I began to remember how I felt, and I began to remember the feeling, as I was making every one of these pieces. And slowly I came to the notion that, there might be something in here. Norman Mailer did a book like this. I think it's Advertisement for Myself, where he, published a bunch of stuff. I like to think his intentions were a little different than mine. But he published a bunch of stuff, and then he had these interstitial pieces, and I thought, hey, that might be something that could work. And so I hope it gives value more than you going to Atlantic.com and just printing out everything and stapling it together and saying, here.
That's also okay.
Is it? That's not okay, is
No,
it?
it's okay. You can staple, bind, glue. I don't care what they do with it. As long as they go to Atlantic.com. TheAtlantic.com, by the way. Let me ask you this final question before we go to questions. It's about the Atlantic. It's going to sound like a leading question. but it's actually not. I want to understand the answer to this. Could these pieces, the 8 pieces that are compiled here, plus the epilogue, could you have done this for another publication?
Absolutely not.
I'm curious.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's just true all the way through. I mean, you take the first piece. I got assigned that after, in 2007, I'd been laid off from Time Magazine. It was the 3rd job I had lost in 6 years. I don't know what possessed James Bennett to give me 8,000 words to write about Bill Cosby, but he did. He was friends with my old mentor, my dearly departed David Carr, and David Carr spoke up for me, but that's not enough. I mean, he still didn't have to do it, but he did do it. After I did that, and as I talk about in that story, I believe frankly, Jeff, thanks to you, I was invited out to the Aspen Ideas Festival to talk. I got an opportunity to see James face to face and talk to him. He assigned me another piece on Michelle Obama. We did not know each other that well at all. He had never met me before. What I am trying to say, and I can go through every piece here, is that the people here at the Atlantic, and particularly James Bennett and Bob Cohn, and now Jeff, had a tremendous degree of faith in me. It's easy, and I'm talking to those of you who are in the business of dealing with young people today. It is tremendously easy to have faith in people after everybody talks about how great they are. But there's talent floating all around you. There's a lot of crap floating around you too. Let's be clear about that. But there's talent, floating, all around you. And I had, one great job before here, and then 3 other where people believed, and then 3 other jobs where people just did not believe and were intent on, basically shoving me into a square hole. I was the round peg intent on shoving me into a square hole. And then I got here, and there was just a tremendous amount of faith. So I'll never forget, pitching, Scott Stossel in the case for reparations, and him saying to me, okay, when I first got this pitch, this looked crazy, but the more I read the pitch, the more I thought, this is good. And then talking to James, and James said, okay, well, we're going to do this. We really should go big. We should, go hard. That is not a story that most Black writers tell about white editors. Now, this moment now where everybody's like, yeah, of course, reparations. That was not what fools were saying in 2012 at all. At all. People were looking at you like you were crazy. I told Hannah Rosen, I'll never forget this. I'm sitting out there, I told Hannah Rosen that we were going to do that piece. And her and Zeke Emanuel laughed at me, roared laughing. And I'm not saying it's despite them, but that was the general tenor. And I think one of the things that happened here is I was encouraged, to always go out, pursue the crazy idea that you think, we should be doing. Just make sure you got the facts assembled, the reporting assembled. If you can substantiate it, we're up for it. It's not even my expectation. Well, I guess today people would do it, because of the investment the Atlantic's already made. But it's just not my expectation that, folks knowing who I was at that point would necessarily do that. So, if only for that reason. I have tremendous loyalty to the Atlantic.
Why don't we take a couple of questions? Just raise your hand. I'll try to, and there's a mic actually. There's a question right over here. A couple of mics actually, if you want to raise your hand on this side.
So there's a theory in political science that often new presidents are reactions to the one that came before, and God willing, we will have a new president in 3 years or so. If you could design the perfect president to react to Trump on the questions of race, what would that person be? What would they do?
I can't do that because that person, it actually kind of goes back to the old Cornel thing. Journalists and activists and politicians are in tension. Because activists, and to a greater extent politicians, have to get people to move in a certain direction. They have to package things in such a way that people can coalesce around it and actually do something. Journalists aren't constrained in that way and shouldn't be. For instance, I obviously don't believe in reparations. Do I think somebody should run, who actually wants to be president and actually thinks they should run on that platform? No, that's probably not a good idea. There are all sorts of things I think about the world that would be better for the world that, someone running for national office probably should not do. At the same time, I have to remind them that that's the right thing to do. Because if I don't do that, then you don't like remember where the North Star actually is. You don't remember where the goal actually is, even if you can't get there, and you start thinking like that which is achievable is somehow the best case scenario. And I don't want people to ever, confuse those two things. So I'd be hesitant, to give. Those folks have a job to do. I have tremendous respect for that. My job is to remind people about the limits of the political consensus. I understand you're doing, what's possible. And this was always, my interaction with Obama, but should that be all that's possible?
There are questions over, raise your hand, don't be shy. Over there.
Oh, Deb, hey. This is cheating.
She put her hand up, what am I gonna do?
Okay. Ta-Nehisi, could you talk to the, quote, young people, which is like everyone in the room besides Jim and me here, about you are extraordinarily talented. You are also very fortunate. What about the people who are extraordinarily talented and may not have had the breaks or good fortune to end up at the Atlantic or to have people who continue to listen to them to keep fighting? What do you tell them if there are more obstacles in their way, excuse me, to keep on going and to try to continue with what they believe in?
Yeah, I think, and I think this is probably true not just for writing, but I think across the board. I think you can't make conditional decisions. I, for instance, I dropped out of college. I had never been a good student. I knew that I was kind of good at writing. I knew I really liked journalism, and I, kind of had a knack for it. This is what I was going to do. The only question was I going to be able to make a career out of it? But it was what I was going to do. I didn't know where it was going to take me. I didn't know where it was going to ultimately end up. But I was clear it wasn't going to be, I think I can make a better living as a lawyer. Or I think I can make I wasn't going to go back to school and get an MBA. That wasn't, what I was going to do this. And so I think you really need to be very intentional, about your time and about what you're doing. Don't do things that get you. I mean, look, this is all I know. This is what I know. I could be, I'm always nervous about this because I could be dead wrong. You know what I mean? I can only tell you like what I've learned along my path. If you want to do the thing, find ways to do the thing. Don't find ways to be adjacent to the thing. Don't find ways to do other things in your life. Do the thing. Sometimes that means being poor. I mean, that's just part of it, So for me, it was just a matter of being very, very direct, being, really intentional. I wasn't going to do anything else, I had the fortune for me and misfortune, for those folks, of growing up in a community of really, really intelligent African Americans who had not been given the opportunity to express their intelligence. Honestly, my dad, I always think of, as one. I've told him this. He didn't have the opportunity to sort of express, the way I had the opportunity to express. There's a great, sort of archetype in the African American community. The guy who graduates from college and ends up working at the post office, which is a thing that happened for us a lot. And so I always felt, some just tremendous amount of privilege to have the opportunity to actually express that, to be open. Open my thoughts and to actually write a piece about, reparations in that way. But it really wasn't going to be anything else for me. And when you can do that, when you can burn the ships, it gives a kind of intention, I would say ferocity. I know it did to me for my writing because there's no going back. There's no other thing. There's no writing, in such a way, as to, lead to something else. I wasn't writing to become, I don't know, some other thing. The writing was a thing. It was what I cared about. It wasn't a path to, something else. And so I think the idea of being very, very intentional about your time, being a little desperate almost, is a good thing.
That's right.
Yeah, so I have my own theories on the Cornell thing, as you call it. Um, Partly
Can
his
enlighten
own
me.
fear of being irrelevant, but we won't go into that. But part of the criticism was about you being put on this pedestal as the person who translates the collective black voice down to the white people. So, do you feel like you've been put on that type of pedestal? And you alluded to that a little bit, but then also, how do we make sure, and then in your position, how do we make sure that other black voices that are being elevated?
Yeah, of course I've been put on a pedestal. Um, I challenge you to find um, a black writer of any degree of fame, um, even those who we believe in, who has not been put on a pedestal. It's not black folks publishing James Baldwin's work. You know, it wasn't black folks editing James Baldwin's work. Find next time, half of it was published in Dissent, the other half was published in the New Yorker. There were very few, if any, other black people at the New Yorker or Dissent at that time. Um, so I don't know how it's possible. Cornell, himself, I mean, has lived in the Ivy Leagues. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't pretend like you've been writing for Amsterdam News. Or the Chicago Defender for the past, 40 years. And it's interesting because, Cornell actually has been attacked for this, in the past. I talk about it in the book. You're just interpreting for white people. What act of writing is not interpreting? Why are you writing if you're not interpreting? If I already understand what you're saying and everything you're gonna, why would I read you? And so the question of you being interpreting for white people is only a matter of what number of people, given that we're a minority in this country, actually buy you. So the minute you sell more than X number of books, yes, you're automatically probably interpreting for white people. What does that say about your actual intent? Nas is interpreting for white people. He has to be. It's not because he set out to say, I'm going to, interpret for white people. Coltrane, is interpreting for white people. He has to, just because of the sheer numbers. That says nothing about the actual intent. And the flip side of this is, what do you really want? You want white people to listen or not? I mean, what are you actually trying? You cannot, on the one hand, say white people are totally ignorant of this, and then when they say, well, maybe I should learn something about housing discrimination. You know what I mean? Like, what do you want here? But you got to pick one. Now that does not excuse folks stopping, at one book and saying, ha ha. You know what I mean? I think I know everything. Any more than it would be, somebody listening to Illmatic and say, ha ha, I understand hip hop. You never want that. You never want that. But that's not Nas's fault. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's not the person making, that might point to some, level of incuriosity, among certain people, but I mean, what would you have me do? Should I leave the Atlantic? Should I burn every copy of Between the World and Me? Do you want me to, stop writing? Do you want me to, take my, articles offline and just hand them out on 125th Street? 125th Street is changing too, by the way.
It's not gonna, yeah.
I mean, what is, see, when people say that, they need a plausible alternative to that. And it can't just be the very presence of white people here automatically make this illegitimate. White people publish autobiography of Malcolm X. I mean, what do you want to do here? And so while I understand the frustration, and I should add, listen, I don't know anybody's heart. God, I'm about to get in trouble.
No, keep going. This is the good part. Go on.
Let me tell you something. Half these Negroes want to be on a pedestal. I mean, let's just be real about this. Let's be really, really straight about this. I'm happy that I can earn a living writing. I really am. And I'm happy that, my wife who supported me all those years can now go pursue her dreams. I'm happy I ain't got to worry about my kids' college tuition. You know what I mean? I wish more of us could experience that. But I don't feel any guilt, about that, like, whatsoever. I will only feel guilt at the moment that something I'm writing has somehow been corrupted by that I start writing with that intent, that I start shuffling and dancing for people, but, the material, largesse or whatever it's brought me, the audience, the attention, all that says to me is I need to honor that commitment. We sold over 1 million copies of Between the World. What that says to me is I need to do even better next time. I need to do more, and so I don't know how to write and not interpret. You know what I mean? I don't know, yes, I'm on a pedestal, but my job is to make sure that the pedestal doesn't define me. And when it goes that I'm okay, and when it goes that I'm not, in my elder years, walking at some young boy over something, that I'm better than that. That's my whole job.
Ta-Nehisi has a lot of qualities that I admire and have admired over the years. The quality I admire most is that he's an honest man. And I want to thank you for doing this today and thank all of you for coming. We really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.